So, Rachel, I think the best place to start this conversation actually is with your own personal journey of your own struggles with eating disorders. You used to deal with them yourself. You have since overcome them. You have transformed your own relationship with food, and you are now sharing what you went through with the world and using your own experiences to mentor other people to try to improve their own relationships with food. So can you take me back to the time in your life when you were having these struggles, and can you tell us what exactly you were struggling with, what disorder specifically you were struggling with, and what that kind of looked like for you on a daily basis?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a long story, but I will try and be concise with it. So for me, my first issues came up pretty early in age, roughly around sixth, seventh grade. And for me, it started with body image issues. So I became very aware of what my body looked like, what beauty standards were like. And, even though looking back at pictures of myself, I was what you would consider thin, did not feel like that at all. So, in hindsight, definitely not a normal feeling to have at the time. And I think a lot of it stemmed from, growing up watching my mom and a lot of other women who were older trying to diet. And, within that time period is really when fad diets came out. So seeing, a lot of my role models engage in those behaviors and disliking their body. And then two, I dance. So, that can appearance, weight can be a pretty heavy topic in that realm. So I think I was very just hyper aware of how I looked, how I was eating. And so it trickled into, starting to restrict, getting more knowledgeable about reading labels and finding, low calorie foods. And so on and off, I would say from about that time to up through high school, I had gone through periods of restrictive eating. It translated into over exercising at times. Really just, I wanted to lose weight. I never thought I was thin enough. And, there would be periods where it got a little bit better, got a little bit worse. Continued on, and through college, I experienced my first binge eating episode. So I think it was about sophomore year was when my binge eating started. And it was pretty intense. So at that time, I would have been diagnosed with binge eating disorder. Just looking at the criteria that you use to diagnose it. And that carried on for a couple of years, again, on and off. At that point, I was alternating between binging, restricting, over exercising, just all of the realms of disordered eating, dieting, trying different methods to lose weight that just did not work. So a lot of little holes in between there, but that's kind of my long journey into my disordered eating.
Let's unpack restricting a little more. So when you say that you were restricting your diet on and off through the years while you struggle with this, what exactly did that look like?
Yeah, so it looks different for everyone, but for me, I set a calorie restriction. So, I don't love to talk about numbers, but I think 1,200 calories is a very well-known number that has been put out in diet culture for women to cut down to for weight loss. So I was stuck on that number. I would, count calories. It also translated into food groups. So eventually I would start picking off specific foods and entire food groups that I couldn't have. So at one point I cut out, pretty much all fat from my diet. I've done periods of pretty much no carbs in my diet. So, that term of restriction is, the physical sense of restricting food. But then there's also the mental restriction of, thinking I shouldn't have this, or I can't have this, or if I do have this, I need to compensate somehow. The restrictive mindset is also a very big role in disordered eating.
And also, it is, I think, encouragement from others. And what I mean is that, and I actually had this conversation with my yoga instructor on the last podcast that I had. She struggled with an eating disorder during college, and she said that no one really told her how skinny she was getting in a bad way, because the default when you see your friend getting skinny is, oh my gosh, you look so good. What are you doing? And it, that positive reinforcement encourages you to keep living that way when you probably shouldn't be. So how big a role does that play in it?
Oh my gosh. Entirely. It is contributing to the worsening of disordered eating and eating disorders. I mean, it's scary how well marketing companies for diet products and diets are able to flip wording to where, dieting is now marketed as wellness and lifestyle. And so a lot of disordered eating behaviors go unseen or unrecognized because those fall exactly in line with what diet culture is telling us. And of course, our society, for as long as we can remember, has treated thinner as better. And so, of course, if you see someone losing weight, that just feeds compliments. Like, you look so good now, which only further gives the point of you weren't adequate when you were at a higher weight. So yeah, entirely makes a huge impact.
Did you have any moments, any really low points or bad moments that you can remember and, that you'd be willing to share with us? Was there a rock bottom or something like that?
Yeah, completely. I mean, there were lots of rock bottoms, I feel. But I would say sophomore year of college was actually my absolute deepest time period. I think it had a lot to do with my stress levels, with my coursework. I was taking a heavy semester. That was my first real encounter with binge eating. And, I don't know if you're familiar with what binge eating exactly is, but when it comes to when we're thinking of the disorder, it is completely uncontrollable. So it feels like you're having an out of body experience when you're binging. You're eating super rapidly, grabbing anything you can see. It doesn't even have to be a food you like or love. It's just you have to be putting something in your mouth until you're completely uncomfortable and overly full. And, there would be times where I would literally fall asleep. Like, I could not stay awake because I indulged so much. So anyway, yes, that was the deepest point. I remember trying to get out of binge eating by then restricting and exercising, trying to offset the two. And it just became this vicious cycle that I did not know how to get out of. I was too embarrassed to talk to anyone. So yeah, that was by far the darkest time I've had.
Now, what drove you to binge eating? Because to me, what you just described sounds like a not fun experience at all. So what was the appeal of it to you at the time?
Well, I think a lot of factors go into it. So for me, having my long history of restriction, I think my body eventually caught up with itself with realizing I've been starving my body for so long. Now I'm going to completely compensate and, overfeed myself. And I think too, it was kind of a survival mechanism for me. And I think a lot of people who struggle with binge eating, while they hate it and they feel shame around it, there's also this sense of it's comfort. I have never been good at communicating my feelings. That's something I've worked on. And that's one of the ways that I was able to get out of my disordered eating, was learning healthier coping mechanisms, learning to talk about, what I've been dealing with people I love. And so at the time it was like, I felt like I had no one who I could turn to or that I had the ability to talk to. I was undergoing severe stress. I didn't know any other option than to turn to food because, again, growing up, I had role models who, and a lot of us do this, who used food to cope. Emotional eating and stress eating is a very real thing too. And that's not to say it's a bad thing. I think everyone engages in emotional or stress eating at some point, but it's when that's your only coping mechanism that it becomes a problem. And that was the case for me.
Now, did anyone notice these behaviors that you were engaging in?
So I can think back to a few times that I think I almost got caught. Like I can laugh about it now, but it was mortifying. And I think that, these were my friends that I think had maybe seen bits and pieces of it. And I think if they knew about it, they didn't say anything. I would think if I were in their shoes, I wouldn't want to make the person feel uncomfortable unless they were ready to talk about it. That's just my guess. To this day, I don't know. I should actually ask them. Um, but at the time, I had actually tried talking to a family member about it. And again, I was not great at articulating my words at the time. So I got one word out and started bawling my eyes out. But once I was able to get a little bit of what I was trying to say out, unfortunately it was kind of dismissed, or a little bit downplayed. No, you're fine. It's not that serious. Everyone, struggles with, everyone eats emotionally. And I don't think I was able to really give a clear picture of I need help. I have a problem and I need help. And so that was a really discouraging moment for me to then close back up again and say, well, I just tried expressing myself and getting help and I didn't get it. So now I'm going to shut myself off completely and never say anything. I'm going to work through this on my own.
So were you totally aware that you had an issue?
When it got to the binge eating, yes. I always knew. I was like, I'm kind of, I always had stress around food. I always thought about it more than what I thought what was normal and typical. But when it got to the binge eating was a whole other animal that, I didn't even know existed. I didn't know that binge eating was an actual diagnosis. I didn't know it was a common thing. It's actually one of the most common eating disorders or disordered eating behaviors. But at the time, I thought it was just me. I thought it was a me problem. I was like, what is happening? I'm disgusting. I have no idea what is going on in my body. I feel out of control. So, yeah, it was a scary time and I knew what was going on at the time, but I didn't have the ability to seek help or really help myself in the moment.
What's really interesting about your story is that, you were going to school, University of Delaware, to study nutrition and dietetics, right? So you knew what was good and bad behavior probably from your courses, but yet you were engaging in them yourselves.
Yeah, that's a great point to bring up that I love to talk about now. Would have hated it back then. But so I actually did not initially major in nutrition. I did, however, get into nutrition in my sophomore year. So during my worst period of binge eating is when I started to major in nutrition. And thinking back to it, everyone always asks, well, why nutrition? And I'd always kind of create some different variation of, I love eating healthy, or, I love living a healthy lifestyle. I love working out. My restrictive tendencies. I used that as an excuse because I was always known as the healthy friend. So I was like, that's perfect. Second case, reason really was I was thinking, okay, if I can get into nutrition as a profession, then I will know everything I need to for quote, my magic pill, of, curing my issues, losing weight at the time is what I still wanted. And so in kind of a messed up way, I was like, yeah, let me become the expert and gain all of this knowledge so that I can use it to my benefit. So in a way, it was kind of like a cry for help to, figure out what is going on with me and what do I need to do to get better.
So it's interesting. So it was more about trying to fix your own problems than initially then help other people with theirs.
Yeah. I think at the time I had convinced myself that, I wanted to help people with learning how to eat healthier. And that's still true. That doesn't mean, because I want to help people fix their relationship with food, that I don't want people to be healthy. That's also a misconception with, if you're going to fix your relationship with food, you're just disregarding your health. That's not the case. So, I blended the two now, but back then, I thought I wanted to help people and think like, oh, well, I know all of the ways to restrict. And if you think about it in nutrition and dietetics, that is what a lot of traditional dietitians do, is help people lose weight through restriction. And so it's just gotten to this level now that it's, dieting is disordered eating. So yeah, very interesting path that I took to start my journey.
So you had your rock bottom, that episode of binge eating. Usually when we identify a rock bottom, it's usually kind of the turnaround point for someone to start building back up to, the person that you want to be. So you had your rock bottom. What happened after that?
Yeah. So quite honestly, it had taken a long time for me. Again, I wasn't very open at the time to talking to anyone, not even, a therapist or someone professionally. So for me, I went through that cycle for, probably an entire semester, if not longer. And then, summer hit, went back home. And I just got back on track with exercising. That was when I really discovered kind of like more weightlifting style. And so from there, I kind of took an alternative route of, becoming obsessive with healthy eating and exercising. So the story did not end. I learned a lot more balance than what I had when I was younger and only restricting. But at the same time, there was still always that want to look better or feel like I need to lose weight. I feel like for a very long time, even after my rock bottom, I felt like I was an imposter being in my major. Like no one else could possibly be dealing with eating issues. When in reality, a lot of people who go into nutrition and dietetics have had their own story with it. I know that now, but it took a long time. So anyway, it really took therapy, kind of talking things out, not just with food and my relationship with my body, but also the deeper things. I had a lot of unresolved traumas that I didn't work through. And I think that plays a big role in disordered eating and coping mechanisms. So yeah, from there, it was kind of like up and down and up and down. And it wasn't until probably after I graduated that I really feel like I was on the path to fully healing my relationship with food. Because in college, it's a different lifestyle than anything else, right? There was also like binge drinking on top of binge eating. So it was like I couldn't really get out until I was out of an entire, that entire environment.